Greetings, friends in ADHD. It's Russ Barkley, here again with part 3 of my 4-part series on ADHD, gift or curse, in which I am comparing and contrasting the views of my good friend Dr. Ned Hallowell with my own with regard to ADHD and its nature. In the first 2 parts, as you know, I talked about the background to this discussion or debate, how it's often misrepresented by others. And in the last video, part 2, I talked about the many areas of agreement between Dr. Hallowell and I on our perspectives on ADHD. Now, in this particular part, part 3, I want to talk about certain concessions that I wish to make sincerely to some of the critics of my own opinions about ADHD. So let's take a look at these to see where I may actually happen to agree sometimes with some of the critics of my opinions that perhaps I might be over-pathologizing ADHD relative to the opinions held by people like Dr. Hallowell, Dr. Rady, and others, that ADHD conveys positive benefits to the individual. First of all, I would like to point out that I and other clinical scientists who make a career of studying ADHD have focused almost exclusively in our work on the deficits and impairments that are associated with ADHD, and that we have done so at the group level of analysis. So this is what we write grants on and so on, because we don't get supported to investigate the potential positive benefits of this disorder, because if we did, then it's not necessarily a disorder, is it? So anything that's going to bring a lot of positive benefits to the individual or outcomes is not going to be necessarily classified as a neurodevelopmental disorder or condition. I also concede that when we study groups at this group level of comparing groups of ADHD with groups of other individuals, including typical control individuals, that this approach can tend to homogenize people with the disorder and therefore pathologize the clinical view of ADHD. Because by presenting only the average of the group, we are not really able to represent the wide individual variation among people with ADHD and their various attributes. So individuals, as you know, are not averages or composites of mean scores, even though that's what we all tend to study in research. They are, in fact, individuals and will vary from each other. And the variation is probably greater than the similarities that we find across people due to the disorder. Now, another thing that I'll concede is that this approach can often mask the incredible range of variation, but also the variety of symptoms, deficits, personal strengths, talents, personality traits at the individual level in those with ADHD. There's just a heck of a lot of variation out there, and we average across that in order to come up with general conclusions, generalities about things that go with having this condition, overlooking, of course, the many individual differences in the population of people who have ADHD. And then, of course, we acknowledge that some individuals within our groups can have domains of high success, great achievement, even giftedness, even if they do have ADHD as a disorder, and even if it does impair them in some domains of major life activities. Think about Michael Phelps, Simone Biles, these Olympic athletes who have performed so well, other athletes in other professions, and celebrities like Justin Timberlake, or individuals like Paris Hilton. And then there are, of course, TV personalities like Ty Pennington, Glenn Beck, and others. There are many, many success stories out there of people with ADHD. And I have to concede that certainly when I study groups of individuals, there will be a few individuals in those groups that are highly competent and highly successful in spite of their ADHD. Now, mind you, As you know, I don't believe it's because of their ADHD. I think it's due to many other factors than that. But let's acknowledge that there are many successful people with ADHD out there. I'll also concede that in the struggle of people with ADHD to cope with so pervasive and frustrating a disability as ADHD at their individual level, some people can rise to higher levels of psychological or social accomplishments than they might otherwise have done. As Orrin Mason, a good friend of mine in clinical practice, has pointed out, there can be incredible acts of heroism, if you will, in people who not only struggle against ADHD, but proceed to try and overcome its adverse effects on their life in their specific instances, and by overcoming incredible odds that may have been against them to do so, despite having this disability. So I'll certainly concede that those people are out there, and that some people, just as people who struggle with other medical conditions like cancer or other very life-threatening conditions, may rise to levels of heroic behavior in response to coping with, dealing with, and even overcoming to some extent some of the adverse aspects of their condition or disorder. And let's also concede the fact that there has also arisen a great deal of confusion in the roles that Ned and I play within the ADHD community, particularly among ADHD advocates. We're quite different in our activities, not just in some of our opinions. I am a clinical scientist, and although I was in clinical practice for many decades and saw many thousands of families and patients with ADHD, the primary focus of what I'm known for are my scientific publications, my professional books, and to some extent my trade books, in which I represent the nature of ADHD as a disorder and also talk about its adverse consequences at these group levels of comparison. Ned, on the other hand, is a clinician and a therapist. He focuses on individuals in his practice and on tailoring this rich vein of information about groups down to the individual and to what extent it applies to them or not in their unique circumstances. In doing so, Ned hopes to inspire hope in these individuals that they can have a better life than they've had with their ADHD. And in so doing, he hopes to reduce harm and suffering. Both of us hope to do that, by the way, but we do it through very different means. I do it through clinical research, my publications, and my advocacy, and Ned, of course, is doing it at the individual level through his work with individual patients and, of course, his public speaking and writing on the subject that is so infused with his clinical wisdom. So I'll certainly concede all of these points about the differences in our opinions. Next up, in part 4 of this series, I'm going to talk about the areas in which we do disagree about ADHD. So I hope you come back and join me for that final video lecture on this topic. In the meantime, as I always say, if you are not a subscriber, think about subscribing. If you are, think about recommending this channel to others who might be in need of this information. And of course, live well, be well. Take care.